Good morning, I'm Remo, and this is the Daily Signal for November 18th, 2025. We're starting with breaking news. A major sabotage attack has targeted critical infrastructure in Poland, with Prime Minister Donald Tusk confirming explosives destroyed a key railway line supplying military aid to Ukraine. This is developing rapidly, and authorities are hunting suspects who may have Russian connections.
Unfiltered. Now.
That's just the beginning. Here are 9 more critical stories breaking today that you absolutely need to know about. Chile's democracy faces a crisis as presidential elections head to an unprecedented runoff, with 70% of voters backing right-wing candidates in a massive political shift. Russian forces strike a Turkish LNG tanker in Ukraine's Odessa port, triggering emergency village evacuations across the Romanian border as tensions explode between NATO allies. Bangladesh's ousted prime minister sentenced to death for ordering deadly crackdowns on protesters, sparking international condemnation and fears of further violence. Japanese warplanes scramble as Chinese military drones penetrate airspace near Taiwan, bringing Asia to the brink of a major confrontation. Ukraine's government teeters on collapse as a massive corruption scandal threatens to topple leadership during the most critical phase of the war. The UN Security Council stuns the world by endorsing Donald Trump's controversial Gaza peace plan, reshaping Middle East diplomacy overnight. Britain announces the harshest asylum policy in decades, 20-year waiting periods, and government seizure of refugee assets as immigration crisis deepens. Hundreds of Gaza refugees arrive in South Africa on secret flights, with authorities demanding answers about who organized the massive operation. Trump announces plans to sell advanced F-35 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia as the Crown Prince prepares for a controversial White House visit. These stories are developing fast. Let's get the critical details you need to know. This is happening right now. Polish authorities are scrambling to secure their borders after what Prime Minister Donald Tusk is calling an unprecedented act of sabotage against Poland's national security. Here's what we know. Explosives destroyed a crucial section of the Warsaw-Lublin railway line over the weekend, the exact same route used to transport military supplies and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. No one was injured, but this wasn't an accident. What authorities aren't telling you is how vulnerable this makes NATO's eastern flank. This railway carries weapons, ammunition, and critical supplies that Ukraine desperately needs. Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz has ordered the military to inspect 120 kilometers of track, and they've detained multiple suspects. The timing is no coincidence. This sabotage comes as winter warfare intensifies in Ukraine. Sources suggest Russian operatives may be behind the attack, marking a dangerous escalation that brings the conflict directly to NATO territory. This could mean Poland invoking Article 5 if Russian involvement is proven. We'll continue monitoring this developing crisis. Meanwhile, another crisis is spiraling in Latin America. Chile's democracy is facing its biggest test in decades as presidential elections head to a dramatic runoff that could reshape South American politics. The shocking results: 70% of Chilean voters backed right-wing candidates in the first round, delivering a crushing blow to the left-wing government of Gabriel Boric. Communist Party candidate Jeanette Jara barely scraped into the runoff against conservative José Antonio Cast. This is far worse than initial polls predicted. The massive swing to the right signals deep dissatisfaction with economic policies, rising crime, and social unrest that has plagued Chile since 2019. What makes this unprecedented is the return of compulsory voting, meaning this result reflects the true will of Chilean society, not just political activists. The runoff on December 14th will determine whether Chile joins the growing wave of right-wing governments across Latin America. The implications are staggering. Chile has been a beacon of democracy in South America. If it swings hard right, it could trigger similar movements across the continent. Adding to today's chaos, we're tracking a dangerous escalation in the Black Sea that's threatening to drag NATO directly into the Ukraine conflict. Russian forces have struck a Turkish LNG tanker in Ukraine's Odessa port, causing such massive explosions that villages across the Romanian border are being evacuated. This isn't just an attack on Ukraine anymore. This is hitting NATO allies directly. Turkey is demanding immediate explanations from Moscow, while Romania has activated emergency protocols along its border. The strike has contaminated air quality and triggered fears of environmental disaster. What authorities are scrambling to contain is the diplomatic fallout. Turkey supplies critical energy to Europe, and this attack threatens those supplies right as winter approaches. Romania, as a NATO member, is now dealing with refugees from what's essentially Russian military action. Sources confirm this is the first time Russian strikes have caused direct harm to NATO territory. The alliance is holding emergency consultations, and Article 5 discussions are reportedly on the table. This is exactly the kind of escalation NATO has been desperately trying to avoid. The crisis deepens as we turn to Bangladesh, where a controversial death sentence is sparking international outrage and fears of renewed violence. A special tribunal has sentenced former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina death for her role in the deadly crackdown on protesters earlier this year. The charges include crimes against humanity and mass murder of demonstrators. This isn't just about justice, it's about revenge. Hasina fled the country in August after massive protests toppled her government, but now the new authorities want her blood. The death sentence covers her ordering security forces to fire on protesters, killing hundreds. International observers are calling this political persecution, not justice. The UN, European Union, and human rights groups are demanding the sentence be overturned, warning it could trigger a new cycle of violence. What makes this explosive is Hasina's threat to expose corruption involving current leaders if she's executed. Sources suggest she has documents that could implicate dozens of officials in financial scandals. Bangladesh is already struggling with economic crisis and political instability. This death sentence could be the spark that ignites nationwide chaos, just as the country desperately needs stability. In related breaking news, the situation is deteriorating rapidly in Asia as Japan and China edge toward direct military confrontation. Japanese fighter jets scrambled after Chinese military drones penetrated disputed airspace near Taiwan, bringing the region to its most dangerous flashpoint since the 1990s. This wasn't a navigation error. Chinese drones deliberately approached Japan's southern islands close to Taiwan, testing response times and defensive capabilities. Japanese self-defense force jets intercepted the drones within minutes, but the message was clear: China is probing for weaknesses. What's terrifying defense analysts is the coordination. Multiple drones approached from different directions simultaneously, suggesting this was a planned operation to map Japanese radar and response protocols. Taiwan's defense ministry is calling this a rehearsal for invasion, and they're not wrong. China has been conducting increasingly aggressive reconnaissance missions, and this represents a major escalation that directly threatens Japanese territory. U.S. military officials are reportedly holding emergency consultations with Japanese and Taiwanese counterparts. The fear is that China is preparing for something much bigger, and these drone flights are just the beginning. Meanwhile, Ukraine's war effort faces an internal crisis that could be more dangerous than Russian missiles, a massive corruption scandal that's threatening to topple the government at the worst possible moment. Sources confirm that senior Ukrainian officials are under investigation for embezzling billions in Western aid money meant for weapons and humanitarian supplies. The scandal reaches the highest levels of government and could force mass resignations. This comes as Ukraine desperately needs continued Western support for winter warfare. The timing couldn't be worse. Donor countries are already questioning aid effectiveness, and this corruption expose could cut off the financial lifeline Ukraine depends on. What makes this catastrophic is the scale. Investigators suggest the embezzlement may exceed $2 billion, including funds meant for critical air defense systems that could have saved civilian lives. President Zelensky's government is reportedly considering emergency measures to contain the scandal, but it may be too late to prevent political collapse. In an absolutely unprecedented diplomatic development, the UN Security Council has voted to endorse Donald Trump's controversial Gaza peace plan, stunning diplomats and reshaping Middle East politics overnight. The plan reportedly includes massive reconstruction funding, temporary international administration of Gaza, and phased Israeli withdrawal from occupied territories. What makes this explosive is that even Russia and China voted in favor. This represents Trump positioning himself as a global peace broker. The endorsement gives his plan international legitimacy that could pressure current leadership to adopt it. Sources suggest secret negotiations have been ongoing for months, with major powers agreeing to support Trump's framework in exchange for U.S. commitments on other global issues. Britain is implementing the harshest immigration policies in decades as the asylum system faces complete collapse under unprecedented numbers of refugees. The new policy includes 20-year waiting periods for asylum decisions and government seizure of refugee assets to pay for processing costs. Critics are calling it a violation of international law. What's driving this crisis is numbers. Britain is receiving over 100,000 asylum applications annually, overwhelming the system and creating massive processing backlogs. The policy allows authorities to confiscate refugee property, vehicles, and savings to fund detention centers and processing. Human rights groups are threatening legal challenges. Adding to Middle East tensions, hundreds of Gaza refugees have arrived in South Africa on mystery flights, with authorities demanding answers about who organized the massive operation. The refugees arrived on unmarked aircraft over the weekend, bypassing normal immigration procedures. South African officials were notified only hours before the flights landed. This appears to be a coordinated humanitarian operation, possibly funded by international donors or Middle Eastern governments seeking to relocate Palestinian refugees. The mystery deepens as neither Israel, Egypt, nor Palestinian authorities are claiming knowledge of the operation. Finally, Donald Trump has announced plans to sell advanced F-35 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia, coinciding with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's planned White House visit. This represents a major shift in U.S.-Saudi relations and could reshape Middle East military balance. The F-35s would give Saudi Arabia unprecedented air superiority over regional rivals. The timing suggests this arms deal is linked to Saudi support for Trump's Gaza peace plan and broader Middle East realignment. Congress would need to approve the sale, setting up a major political battle over arms exports to controversial allies. This is all part of a bigger picture that's emerging today. We're witnessing multiple global crises that are interconnected in dangerous ways. The Polish sabotage, Black Sea tensions, and Asian military confrontations all point to a world where proxy conflicts are escalating toward direct superpower confrontation. Meanwhile, political systems from Chile to Bangladesh are facing unprecedented instability. What ties these stories together is the collapse of the post-Cold War order. Traditional alliances are fracturing, new power blocs are forming, and regional conflicts are threatening to merge into global crisis. The Trump diplomatic initiatives, whether in Gaza or with Saudi Arabia, represent attempts to create new international frameworks outside traditional institutions. But they're happening as those same institutions, from NATO to the UN, face their greatest tests in decades. The implications are staggering. We could be looking at the most dangerous period of international relations since the Cuban Missile Crisis, with multiple flashpoints threatening to ignite simultaneously. We'll continue monitoring these developing situations throughout the day. The next few hours could be critical in determining whether these crises escalate further or if diplomatic solutions can prevent wider catastrophe. These are the stories shaping our world today, from infrastructure sabotage in Europe to political earthquakes in South America, from military tensions in Asia to diplomatic breakthroughs in the Middle East. Stay informed, stay engaged, and remember that these developing situations affect all of us. I'm Remo, and this has been The Daily Signal. We'll be back tomorrow morning with the latest developments on these critical breaking stories.
Unfiltered. Now.